What is a man but a spark in the night, a breath that dares to challenge the dark? In the heart of every soul there stirs a question, ancient as the hills, soft as the wind through forgotten glades. What does it mean to walk a path not chosen, to bear a name not spoken? For Aragorn, son of Arathorn, this question was no fleeting shadow, but a companion woven into the fabric of his days, from the silvered halls of Rivendell to the lonely trails of the north. His was a life of exile, not from lands or kin alone, but from the certainty of self, a journey through the wilderness of doubt where the stars alone bear witness, and every step is a vow to endure. In the beginning there was a child, and his name was Estel. In Imladris, where the Bruinen murmured secrets and the light fell like a blessing through ancient boughs, a boy grew under the watchful gaze of Elrond, the half-elven whose heart held the lore of ages. Estel knew not the blood that coursed through him, nor the destiny that waited like a storm beyond the hills. He chased the deer through meadows, their hooves a drumbeat on the earth, and sat at the feet of minstrels who sang of Lúthien's grace and Berin's courage. To him the world was a tapestry of wonder, its threads bright with possibility. Yet even in those days there was a stillness, a truth held back, a name cloaked in silence. To be Estel was to be hope, but it was also to be veiled, shielded from a legacy that could shatter a child's heart. The first lesson of exile is the lesson of names. A name is a flame kindling the soul, shaping the world it touches. When Elrond called the boy to his chamber, when the sun's rays slanted through the lattice, and the air grew heavy with truth, the veil was lifted. You are Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, of the line of Elendil. In that moment Estel faded, and a youth stood in his place. A youth whose name carried the weight of a kingdom lost, a people scattered, a hope nearly extinguished. To be Aragorn was to inherit the glory of Númenor, of towers that pierced the heavens and ships that sought the west. But it was also to inherit the shadow of Isildur, whose hand grasped the One Ring and sowed ruin. A name is a gift, but it is also a burden, binding the bearer to a past that whispers of both triumph and shame. In the days that followed, Aragorn walked the paths of Rivendell with a stranger's eyes. The elms seemed taller, their leaves heavy with secrets. The songs of the elves, once a balm, now carried a note of mourning, as if they sang for him, a mortal destined to fade. He stood before the shards of Narsil, the sword that cut the ring from Sauron's hand, yet broke beneath the weight of its deed. What did it mean to be the heir of a blade that failed, to be the son of a line that faltered? The boy who laughed in the glades was gone, replaced by a youth who felt the world's weight upon his chest. Exile began not when he stepped beyond the valley, but when he learned his name, when he understood that to be Aragorn was to stand alone even among those who cherished him. The wild called as it does to those whose souls are restless. Aragorn left Rivendell not as a prince, but as a wanderer cloaked in green and gray, his sword a silent companion, his name a secret even from himself. The trails of Eriador were his first teachers, their lessons carved in frost and stone, in the howl of a wolf, in the silence of a ruined tower. He walked where the kings of Arnor once rode, where the stones of Annúminas lay broken beneath the stars. The wind spoke of faded glory, of halls where harps once sang, now home to thorns and shadows. In these places Aragorn learned the second lesson of exile. The past is a wound that does not close, yet it is also a guide pointing to paths yet untrodden. To walk with the ghosts of his fathers was to feel their gaze. Isildur's choice haunted the quiet hours when the fire dwindled and the night pressed close. Would I have taken the ring? He must have wondered, his breath a fleeting warmth in the cold. Is my will too frail, my blood too weak? The past is not a tale told and done, it is a voice that echoes in the bones. Yet in the ruins among stones that remembered brighter days, he found not only failure but fire. The men of Numenor built with hope, loved with passion, fought with courage. Their flaws did not erase their dreams. To be their heir was to carry their shame, but also their faith, a faith that the world could be healed, that light could return. The wild is a mirror revealing the soul's truths. In the forests of the north, where pines stood like sentinels, Aragorn met himself. He was no king, not yet, but a ranger, a shadow slipping through the dusk, guarding those who knew him not. He tracked orcs across the hills, their fires a scar upon the land. He watched over villages, their lanterns faint against the dark, their people sleeping unaware of the eyes that kept them safe. In these acts he learned the third lesson of exile: duty is not a crown, but a cloak worn in silence, heavy with the lives of others. To serve without thanks, to protect without praise, is to know the heart of leadership, a heart that beats for love, not glory. Love came to him unbidden, like a star breaking through the clouds. In Rivendell, before the wild claimed him, he saw Arwen the even star, her beauty, a light that pierced the heart. Her eyes held the wisdom of the Eldar, yet her smile was warm, mortal in its grace. To love her was to touch eternity, to hold a flame that could warm or burn, but love in exile is a perilous path. Arwen was undying her life, a river that would flow beyond the span of men. To bind his heart to hers was to choose grief, for mortal and immortal cannot walk together long. In the glades of Imladris, where the air was soft and time seemed still, Aragorn learned the fourth lesson of exile. Love is a choice, to wound oneself, to embrace a joy that carries sorrow in its embrace. He did not ask her to forsake her immortality, though her choice to do so was a shadow he bore. Their love was a vow not of safety but of truth, a truth that whispered, "I see you and I will stand with you, though the road be dark." In the wild, when the stars were his only companions, Aragorn held her memory like a beacon. It did not shield him from doubt, but it reminded him why he walked. Love, he learned, is not a refuge, but a call, urging the heart to endure, to fight, to hope. And hope in exile is the hardest lesson of all. Hope is a seed buried in frozen earth, fragile yet defiant. In the wild, where the world seems vast and cold, hope is tested by silence. Aragorn walked alone, his footsteps swallowed by snow, his breath the only sound in the dark. There were nights when the stars hid, when the wind carried no song, when the questions came, what if I fail? What if the world falls and my name with it? In these moments he learned the fifth lesson of exile: hope is not a promise, but a choice. To guard the Shire, to protect the hobbits who laughed and sang unaware of the shadow, was to stake his life on a world that might never know his sacrifice. To walk as a ranger was to believe in a dawn he might not live to see. The wild taught him the lesson of loss. He saw villages burn, their people scattered like leaves. He buried friends, their names etched only in his heart. The Dunedain, his kin, grew fewer with each year, their fires dimming in the north. Loss is the price of exile, paid in moments that slip through the fingers. Yet in loss, Aragorn found a deeper truth: to mourn is to remember, and to remember is to carry the light of what was into the dark of what is. He learned to grieve without breaking, to hold the memory of the fallen as a reason to keep walking, to keep fighting. The paths of exile are not walked alone, though they feel so. Aragorn was joined by the Dunedain, his brothers in shadow, who shared his vigil. He met Gandalf, whose laughter was a spark in the gloom, whose wisdom lit the way. He learned from Elrond, whose love was stern but true, shaping him into a man worthy of his name. In the wild there were moments of warmth, a shared meal by a fire, a tale told under the stars, a song that defied the night. These taught him the sixth lesson of exile: fellowship is a strength greater than steel. To trust others, to lean on their courage, is to know that no burden is borne alone. Yet exile is also a teacher of silence. In the deep woods where the air is still and the world holds its breath, Aragorn listened. What did he hear? The rustle of his own thoughts, the echo of his father's voices, the pulse of a hope that refused to die. Silence is not absence. It is a space where the soul meets itself. In silence he faced his fears. Am I enough? Can I redeem what was lost? In silence he found not answers but questions that were truer than any truth. The seventh lesson of exile is this: to listen is to grow, to question is to live. The road wound on through valleys, where the mist clung low, through hills, where the bones of the earth lay bare. Aragorn's exile was not a quest for a throne, but for a self that could bear it. He was no king, not yet, but a man learning what it means to be human, to doubt, to love, to lose, to hope. The wild was his forge, its trials the hammer that shaped him. In its silence he heard the song of his people, faint but unbroken. In its shadows he saw the light of a city that weighted its towers white against the sky. And so we stand with him at the edge of a forest where the path fades into dusk. The stars are kindling their light, a promise, their distance a truth. Aragorn's journey is not ended, for the wild is but the beginning. Ahead lie battles, love's choices that will test the heart he has forged. But here, in this moment, we pause as the wind carries the scent of earth and pine. What do we learn from our own exiles? What names do we carry? What losses do we mourn? What hopes do we dare to hold? The road is long and the night is deep, but there is a fire within, small but fierce, that whispers, "Walk on." The forest fades, and the path opens to a land of rolling hills, where the grass bends beneath a restless wind and the stars burn fierce against the night. Aragorn walks on his cloak, a shadow his heart, a flame that flickers yet holds. The wild has forged him, taught him the weight of, and in his name, the sting of loss, the quiet strength of hope. But exile is not a single road. It is a tapestry of trails, each thread a lesson, each step a question. What does it mean to stand among men, to bear their hopes, to face the shadow within? The stars do not answer, but they watch, and in their light Aragorn's journey deepens, a song of struggle and seeking that echoes in the bones of the earth. The wild was his first teacher, but the world of men is a sterner master. Aragorn's paths led him beyond the north to lands where the hoofbeats of Rohan thundered and the white walls of Gondor gleamed under the sun. He took new names: Thorongil, the Eagle of the Star, in the courts of Thengel, and Ecthelion, names that cloaked his blood, yet could not hide his heart. In Rohan he rode with the Eorids, their spears glinting like fire, their songs raw with the joy of battle. In Gondor he walked the streets of Minas Tirith, a stranger yet strangely known, his eyes tracing the tower where a crown lay cold. To these peoples he was a captain, a guide, a fleeting light in darkening days. But to himself he was a question, a man seeking the measure of his soul. In the halls of Edoras, where the wind sang through the thatch, Aragorn learned the eighth lesson of exile: to lead is to listen. The Rohirrim were a people of fire, their hearts fierce, their loyalty hard won. They followed him not for his name, which he hid, but for his deeds, his sword that struck true, his voice that calmed the storm. He sat at their fires, heard their tales of worm-slaying and horse-taming, and saw in their eyes a hunger for hope. To lead them was not to command, but to understand, to weave their strength with his own. He learned to hear the unspoken fears beneath their boasts, to guide without ruling, to be a brother before a lord. Leadership, he found, is not a throne, but a bond forged in the quiet moments when hearts align. In Gondor the lesson deepened. The city was a marvel, its 7 tiers rising like a hymn to the past, yet its people were weary, their eyes shadowed by the growing dark in the east. As Thorongil, Aragorn served Ecthelion, steward of Gondor, whose wisdom was great, but whose heart mourned a kingdom without a king. Aragorn led men to battle, burned the ships of Umbar, in a blaze that lit the sea and won victories that echoed in the songs of minstrels. Yet he saw the cost, the blood on the stones, the widow's tears, the children who would never know, their fathers. The 9th lesson of exile came to him in the silence after battle. Power is a blade that cuts both ways. To wield it is to risk becoming what you fight, a shadow that consumes the light it seeks to protect. Temptation followed, as it always does when power is near. In Gondor, Aragorn stood close to the seat of authority, his deeds earning him love that bordered on worship. Whispers grew among the people. Who is this man who fights as a king, who speaks as a sage? He could have revealed his name, claimed the throne, rallied the banners to his side. The crown was his by right, was it not? Yet he did not. Why? Because he saw the shadow of the ring in every crown, the lure of power that had undone Isildur. To claim the throne, unready to rule, without the heart to serve, was to risk a greater fall. The 10th lesson of exile was, this true strength lies in refusal, in turning from the easy path to walk the harder one. Aragorn chose silence, chose the road, chose the ranger's cloak over the king's mantle. The temptation was not only of power, but of peace. In the wild, when the battles were done and the fires low, Aragorn's thoughts turned to Arwen. Her face was a star in his heart, her voice a song that never faded. He could have returned to Rivendell, sought her hand, built a life in the hidden valley where time seemed to pause. Love called to him not as a chain, but as a haven, a place where the weight of the world might be laid down. Yet to choose her was to turn from his path, to leave the world to its shadow. The 11th lesson of exile came in the quiet of those nights. To love is to choose sacrifice. He let her be a light, not a shield, a reason to fight rather than a reason to rest. Her love was his strength, but it was also his wound, a reminder that every choice carries a cost. Fear was his companion, as it is for all who walk in exile. In the south, where the shadow of Mordor grew, Aragorn faced not only orcs, but the specter of failure. Each victory was fleeting, each loss a stone added to the heart. He saw the strength of Sauron's forces, the despair in men's eyes, the fragility of hope. What if he was not enough? What if the line of Elendil ended with him not in glory, but in ruin? The fear was not of death, but of betrayal of the trust placed in him by those who followed, by the memory of his fathers, by the love of Arwen. The 12th lesson of exile was, this fear is not a foe, but a teacher. To feel it is to know the stakes, to walk through it is to grow. Aragorn learned to let fear sharpen his resolve, to let it remind him why he fought. The world of men taught him also the lesson of difference. In Rohan he was a stranger, his Númenórean grace at odds with their earthy fire. In Gondor he was a riddle, his wisdom deeper than his years should allow. He met merchants in the markets, their hands calloused from trade. Soldiers in the camps, their laughter rough with survival. Women in the villages, their eyes fierce with love for their kin. Each was a thread in the tapestry of Middle-earth, each a life that mattered. The 13th lesson of exile was, this to lead is to embrace all, to see the worth in every soul, no matter how small. Aragorn learned to speak their tongues, to share their burdens, to find strength in the diversity of those he served. Faith sustained him, though it was tested. In the wild, faith was a choice made in silence. In the world of men, it was a fire kindled in the clash of swords and the cries of the wounded. Aragorn saw the darkness growing, the shadow that threatened to swallow all. Yet he saw also the light, the courage of a Rohirrim charging into battle, the hope in a Gondorian child's eyes, the loyalty of the Dúnedain who rode at his side. The 14th lesson of exile was, this faith is not blind, but seeing. It is to look upon the world's wounds and believe they can be healed, to see its shadows and trust in the dawn. Aragorn's faith was not in himself, but in the world he fought for, in the goodness that endured despite the dark. The road was long and the years wore on. Aragorn's hair grew streaked with gray, his face lined with the cares of countless battles. He was Thorongil no more, but Strider again, a ranger whose name was a whisper in the taverns of Bree, a figure of mystery to those he protected. He returned to the north, to the lands where his people dwindled, where the wild was both home and crucible. In the silence of those familiar paths he reflected on the lessons of men. He had led them, loved them, feared for them and learned from them, but the question remained, who am I to bear this burden? It was no longer the question of a youth, but of a man who knew the cost of his path. The lessons of exile are not learned once, but again and again, each time with deeper truth. In the south, Aragorn had faced temptation and chosen duty. In the north, he faced it anew, not as a crown, but as a call to action. The shadow was growing, the ring stirring the world, teetering on the edge of ruin. He could remain a ranger guarding the small and the weak, living in the shadows. Or he could step forward, claim his name, risk all for a hope that might fail. The 15th lesson of exile was, this courage is not the absence of choice, but the making of it. Aragorn chose to walk on, to face the shadow, to be the man his world needed, though it might break him. The stars burned brighter now, their light a call to the heart. Aragorn stood upon a hill, the wind carrying the scent of heather and earth. Below the world stretched wide villages, sleeping rivers, glinting mountains standing sentinel. He thought of Arwen, her love, a star that never set. He thought of Gandalf, whose laughter was a promise of hope. He thought of the men he had led, the lives he had touched, the losses he had borne. The road was not ended, but it was changing its paths, converging toward a destiny he could no longer avoid. The 16th lesson of exile came to him in that moment. The journey shapes the destination. Every step, every choice, every wound had made him who he was, a man ready to face what came next. And so we stand with him on the hill, where the wind sings, where the stars are a crown above the world. The path lies ahead, winding through shadow and light, toward battles, unfought loves, unclaimed hopes, yet to be tested. Aragorn's exile is not over, but it is no longer a flight. It is a march, a gathering of strength for the storm to come. What do we learn from our own journeys? What temptations do we face? What fears do we carry? What faiths do we hold? The night is vast and the road is uncertain, but there is a light within, steady and true, that whispers, walk on. The hill recedes and the path descends into a world where shadows thicken and the air hums with the weight of coming war. Aragorn walks on his stride, steady, his eyes alight with a fire kindled by years of exile. The wild shaped him, the world of men tested him, but now the road turns toward a greater trial, a fellowship bound by hope, a ring that whispers ruin, a destiny that looms like a mountain unclimbed. What does it mean to stand at the edge of fate, to carry not only your own burden, but the hopes of others? The stars burn still, their light a silent vow, and in their glow Aragorn's journey weaves onward, a thread in the tapestry of a world trembling on the brink. The shadow was no longer a rumor, but a presence, its breath cold on the neck of Middle-earth. Aragorn returned to the north, his heart heavy with the knowledge of Sauron's rise. The ring lost for ages had been found, its malice waking in the hands of a creature small and unassuming. In Rivendell, where the Bruinen sang and the leaves held the memory of starlight, he stood among elves and men, dwarves and hobbits, as Elrond called the council that would shape the world's fate. Here was Frodo, a hobbit whose eyes held a courage he did not yet know, bearing a burden that could break kings. Here was Gandalf, whose wisdom was a beacon, yet whose heart mourned the cost of hope. Here was Legolas, whose grace was a reminder of a world unfading. Aragorn the ranger stood among them, his cloak worn, his name still a shadow, and felt the weight of eyes upon him. The 17th lesson of exile came in the council's silence. To bear another's burden is to know the heart of fellowship. Frodo's choice to carry the ring was not his alone. It bound them all, a chain of love and duty that no sword could sever. Aragorn looked upon the hobbit and saw not weakness, but a strength deeper than his own, a strength born of innocence, of a heart that loved the small things of the world. To join the fellowship was to vow not only to protect the ring-bearer, but to carry his hope when it faltered, to shield his light when the dark pressed close. Aragorn learned that leadership is not to stand above but beside, to lift another's load, even when your own threatens to crush you. The road from Rivendell was a thread pulled taut, winding through snow and stone, through forests, where the trees whispered of ancient wars. The fellowship moved as one, yet each heart beat with its own fears. Aragorn walked at their head, his sword ready, his eyes scanning the horizon, for wolves, for orcs, for the unseen eyes that followed. He watched Frodo, whose steps grew heavier with each mile, the ring a stone around his neck. He listened to Gandalf, whose voice carried the weight of centuries, yet trembled with the fragility of the present. He spoke with Legolas, whose laughter was a spark in the gloom, yet whose eyes saw the shadows reach. In their company, Aragorn learned the 18th lesson of Exile. Companionship is a mirror reflecting both strength and frailty. To walk with others is to see your own heart laid bare, to find courage in their trust, to find purpose in their need. The mines of Moria were a wound in the earth, their darkness a test of the soul. When Gandalf fell, his light swallowed by the shadow of the Balrog, the fellowship shattered not in body, but in spirit. Aragorn stood in the gloom, his heart a storm of grief and duty. Gandalf had been their guide, their fire, their friend. His loss was a blade that cut deeper than any orc's axe, yet the hobbits wept, their cries echoing in the stone, and Aragorn knew he could not falter. He took up the mantle of leadership not with pride, but with necessity, leading them through the dark to the light of Lothlorien. The 19th lesson of Exile was this: to lead through loss is to embrace the wound. Grief is not a weakness, but a truth, a reminder of what is worth fighting for. Aragorn learned to carry Gandalf's memory as a spur, not a chain, to guide the fellowship as his friend would have done. In Lothlorien, where time seemed to pause and the air was golden with the light of Malern trees, Aragorn faced a deeper trial. Galadriel, Lady of Light, looked upon him, her eyes piercing the veils of his heart. She saw the man, the ranger, the king unspoken, and she offered him a mirror not of glass, but of truth. "What do you fear, son of Arathorn?" her gaze seemed to ask. He feared failure not for himself, but for those he loved, for Frodo, whose burden grew heavier, for Arwen, whose choice bound her to a mortal's doom, for the world that looked to him, though it knew him not. In her presence he learned the 20th lesson of Exile: to face the self is to face mortality. To be human is to know the end, to love, despite it, to fight though the battle may be lost. Galadriel's gift was not answers, but clarity, a clarity that sharpened his resolve, that made the path ahead both heavier and brighter. The fellowship sailed down the Anduin, the river, a silver thread through a world of green and gray. Aragorn sat at the prow, his eyes on the horizon, his heart with Arwen. Her love was a star that never set, yet its light was a reminder of the choice she had made, to bind her fate to his, to choose death over the undying lands. The weight of her sacrifice was a burden he could not lay down, a love that both strengthened and wounded him. In the rhythm of the oars, in the rush of the water, he learned the 21st lesson of Exile. Love is a debt that cannot be repaid, only honored. He could not spare her the pain of her choice, but he could live worthy of it, could fight for a world where her light might shine, if only for a time. The breaking of the fellowship came at Amon Hen, where the ring's malice worked its will. Boromir, proud and broken, fell to temptation, his heart torn by the desire to save his people. Frodo fled his trust, shaken, his burden too great for fellowship to bear. Aragorn stood upon the hill, his sword bloodied his heart, a storm of guilt and resolve. He could have followed Frodo, could have guarded the ring-bearer to the end, But he chose the hobbits Merry and Pippin captured by orcs, their lives hanging by a thread. The 22nd lesson of Exile was this: to choose is to lose. Every path taken closes another, every vow kept breaks another. Aragorn learned that leadership is not perfection, but decision, the courage to act, though the heart mourns what is left behind. The pursuit across the plains of Rohan was a fire in the blood, a race against time and despair. Aragorn ran with Legolas and Gimli, their steps a drumbeat on the earth, their breaths a vow to the lost. The land was wide, the sky vast, yet the world felt small, narrowed to the hope of finding two small hobbits in a sea of grass. In the chase, Aragorn learned the 23rd lesson of Exile: purpose is found in the small. The fate of the Ring of the World hung in the balance, yet his heart was with Merry and Pippin, with their laughter, their courage, their trust. To fight for the small is to fight for the world, for the small are the roots from which hope grows. The meeting with Eomer, rider of Rohan, was a spark in the dark. The horsemen were proud, their spears gleaming, yet their eyes held the weariness of a land under siege. Aragorn revealed his name, not Thorongil, but Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Elendil, a name that carried the weight of legend. Eomer's gaze was sharp, his heart torn between duty and hope. In that moment, Aragorn learned the 24th lesson of Exile: to claim a name is to risk all. To speak his truth was to invite trust or betrayal, to stand as a beacon or a target. Yet he spoke, and Eomer rode with him, their alliance a fragile bridge between men. Leadership, he found, is vulnerability, the willingness to be seen though it may cost everything. The trail led to Fangorn, where the trees whispered of ancient wrath, and to the miracle of Gandalf's return. The wizard stood clad in white, his eyes alight with a fire that had burned through death itself. Aragorn's heart leapt, yet trembled, for Gandalf was changed, not only their guide, but a herald of a greater purpose. In his presence, Aragorn learned the 25th lesson of Exile: faith is rewarded, but not as expected. The return of hope does not erase the pain of loss, but transforms it, weaving it into a strength unlooked for. Gandalf's light was a call to action, a reminder that the fight was not ended, that the road stretched on. The journey to Edoras was a march through a land shadowed by fear. Rohan was wounded, its king ensnared by whispers, its people faltering under the weight of war. Aragorn walked beside Gandalf, his heart heavy with the memory of Theoden's pride now dimmed by Saruman's malice. In the golden hall where the banners hung limp, he saw the cost of despair, a king who had forgotten his name, a people who had forgotten their fire. The 26th lesson of Exile was this: to lead is to awaken. Aragorn's voice, his presence, his sword were not commands but a call to Theoden to rise, to Rohan to remember, to a world to fight. Leadership is not to rule but to kindle, to breathe life into the embers of hope. The road was a river now rushing toward war, toward choices that would shape the world. Aragorn stood at the edge of Edoras, the wind carrying the scent of grass and steel. He thought of Frodo alone with his burden of Arwen, whose love was a star, and at his heart of Gandalf, whose return was a promise of light. The fellowship was broken, yet its purpose endured, a thread that bound them all. The 27th lesson of Exile came to him in the quiet: the journey is not yours alone. Every step, every choice, every wound is part of a greater song sung by many voices, heard by the stars. Aragorn was not the hero, but a servant, a man whose path was woven with others, whose heart beat for a world he might not save. And so we stand with him, at the edge of a land poised for battle, where the wind carries the cry of horns and the promise of dawn. The path stretches on through fire and shadow, toward choices that will test the soul he has forged. Aragorn's exile is not ended, but it is no longer a wander, it is a charge, a vow to face the dark though it may consume him. What do we learn from our own trials? What burdens do we carry? What losses do we bear? What purposes do we find? The night is deep and the war is near, but there is a fire within fierce and unyielding that whispers, walk on. The horns of Rohan fade, and the path plunges into a land where the earth trembles with the drum of war. Aragorn strides forward, his cloak tattered, his sword, a gleam of starlight in the gloom. The fellowship has broken, yet its vow binds him still, a thread of hope woven through the gathering dark. The world teeters, its fate balanced on the edge of a blade, and Aragorn stands at its heart, not as a king, not yet, but as a man whose every choice shapes the song of ages. What does it mean to face the abyss? To call upon the dead, to claim a destiny that might consume you? The stars flicker their light, a fragile promise, and in their shadow, Aragorn's journey surges onward, a river rushing toward an unseen sea. The road to Helm's Deep was a march through despair. Rohan's fields burned, its people fled, their eyes hollow with the fear of annihilation. Aragorn rode with Theoden, the king reborn, whose heart now blazed with the fire of his fathers. Yet the shadow of Saruman's army loomed, a tide of iron and flame that threatened to drown all hope. In the deeping coombe where the mountains stood like silent judges, Aragorn walked the walls of the Hornburg, his voice steady as he rallied men, elves, and boys to stand against the dark. The air was thick with the scent of rain and steel, the night alive with the growl of orcs. Here, in the face of overwhelming odds, he learned the 28th lesson of exile: despair is a foe that fights from within. To lead is to defy it, to kindle courage in others, even when your own heart quakes, to hold the line though the world seems lost. The battle was a tempest, a clash of wills as much as swords. Aragorn fought beside Legolas, whose arrows sang, and Gimli, whose axe laughed in the face of death. He stood with Theoden, whose charge at dawn broke the enemy's heart. The horns of the horns echoed, and the light of morning revealed a field of victory, yet the cost was written in blood on the stones. Men lay broken, their dreams scattered like leaves. Aragorn walked among the fallen, his heart heavy with their names, and learned the 29th lesson of exile: victory is not triumph, but survival. To win is to mourn, to carry the weight of those who did not see the dawn. Leadership is not to glory in the fight, but to honor the fallen by fighting on. The road turned southward to Isengard, where Saruman's tower stood humbled, its fires quenched by the wrath of Ents. Aragorn stood with Gandalf the White, whose presence was a flame that burned through doubt. The wizard's eyes held a purpose beyond the moment, a vision of a world remade. Yet Aragorn's heart was drawn elsewhere, to Frodo, whose path lay far in the east, and to Merry and Pippin, whose courage had turned the tide. In the ruins of Orthanc, where the Palantir gleamed with a light both perilous and true, Aragorn faced a choice. To look into the stone was to risk Sauron's gaze, to reveal himself as Isildur's heir. Yet he chose to look, to challenge the enemy, to draw his eye from Frodo. The 30th lesson of exile was this: to lead is to risk all, to stand in the light, though it burns, to draw the shadow's wrath so others might walk unseen. The Palantir showed him a truth that cut deeper than any blade Minas Tirith. The White City stood on the brink, its walls threatened by a host beyond counting. And there in the vision was Arwen, her face a star amidst the dark, her life bound to his, her choice a wound that bled anew. The knowledge of her peril, of the world's peril, drove him to a path no living man had dared, the paths of the dead. In Edoras, he parted from Theoden, from Legolas and Gimli, who chose to ride with him, their loyalty a strength he did not deserve. The 31st lesson of exile came in their farewell friendship, is a gift not earned but given. To accept it is to know your own frailty, to lean on others when the road grows steep. The paths of the dead were a wound in the world, a tunnel of shadow where the air was thick with the cries of the betrayed. Aragorn entered his torch, a frail spark, his heart steady though the dark pressed close. The dead oath-breakers, cursed by Isildur, stirred at his coming, their eyes hollow, their voices a hiss of regret. He stood before them not as a ranger, but as the heir of Elendil. His voice a command that echoed through the ages, "Fulfill your oath and be free." They followed a host of shadows, their swords cold as frost. In that moment he learned the 32nd lesson of exile: to command is to redeem. Leadership is not to dominate, but to call forth the best in others, to offer a path from shame to honor, even for the damned. The journey through the paths was a trial of the soul. The dark was not only of stone, but of doubt, of fear that whispered, "You will fail," as Isildur did. Yet Aragorn walked on his heart fixed on the White City, on Frodo's unseen struggle, on Arwen's love. The dead marched behind their presence, a reminder of the past's weight, yet also of its power to be rewritten. Emerging into the light of the stone of Eric, where the oath was sworn, Aragorn saw the world anew, a world worth saving, though it demanded all he had. The 33rd lesson of exile was this: the past is not a chain, but a forge. To face it is to shape it, to turn its wounds into strength, its failures into hope. The ride to Pelargir was a storm of hoofbeats, the dead, a tide that swept the enemy's ships into ruin. Aragorn stood at the helm, his banner unfurled, the star of Elendil gleaming against the black. Men of the south, freed from the corsair's yoke, joined him, their eyes alight with a hope they had forgotten. In their faces he saw the world he fought for, not kings or crowns, but people, their lives small yet sacred. The 34th lesson of exile was this: hope is contagious. To lead is to be a beacon, to show others the light within themselves, to fight for a world where their children might laugh under the sun. The Anduin bore them to Minas Tirith, where the battle raged, a clash of fire and despair. Aragorn landed amidst the chaos, his sword aflame, the dead a terror that broke the enemy's heart. He fought not for glory, but for the city, for its people, for the hobbits he had vowed to protect. The field was won, yet the cost was heavy: lives lost, walls scarred, hearts wounded. In the silence, after Aragorn walked the houses of healing, his hands gentle as he tended the fallen, his voice a balm to their pain. The 35th lesson of exile was this: to heal is to lead. Power is not only in the sword, but in the touch that mends in the heart, that sees the broken and makes them whole. In the halls of Minas Tirith, he faced Denethor the steward, whose eyes burned with pride and despair. The old man saw in Aragorn the king. He feared the heir who threatened his rule. Yet Aragorn did not claim the throne, though the city cried for it. He remained the ranger, the healer, the man who served. The 36th lesson of exile was this: to lead is to wait. Destiny is not seized, but earned, not in the moment of victory, but in the quiet choices that prove the heart. Aragorn's crown was not yet his, for the world still hung in shadow, and Frodo's path was unfinished. The war was not ended, but its heart lay in the east, where Frodo walked alone. Aragorn stood before the captains of the west, his voice steady as he proposed the impossible: to march on the Black Gate, to draw Sauron's eye, to give Frodo time. It was a choice born of faith, not in victory, but in the hobbit's heart. The 37th lesson of exile was this: sacrifice is the truest leadership. To fight a battle you may not win, to risk all for another's hope, is to know the soul of exile, to walk on though the end is unseen. The road to Mordor was a march through ash and fear, the air heavy with the stench of ruin. Aragorn led the host, his banner high, his heart fixed on the small figure he could not see. He thought of Arwen, whose love was a star that burned through the dark. He thought of Frodo, whose courage was a light no shadow could quench. He thought of the world, its beauty and its pain, its people and their dreams. The 38th lesson of exile came to him on that road: purpose is greater than self. To lead is to serve a cause beyond your own, to fight for a world that will outlive you, to love though it breaks you. And so we stand with him at the edge of Mordor, where the earth is scarred and the sky is flame. The Black Gate looms a challenge to all he has become. Aragorn's exile is not ended, but it is no longer a flight or a march. It is a stand, a defiance of the dark, a vow to be the man his world needs. The path lies ahead to a final choice, a final hope, a final song. What do we learn from our own battles? What fears do we face? What sacrifices do we make? What purposes do we serve? The shadow is vast, and the end is uncertain, but there is a light within, unyielding and true, that whispers, "Walk on." The Black Gate stands silent, its iron jaws a scar against a sky of ash and flame. Aragorn stands before it, his banner torn, his sword steady, his heart a beacon in the dark. The host of the West is small, a flicker of light against the shadow of Mordor, yet they stand bound by a hope that defies the world's end. The journey of exile has led him here, through wilds and wars, through love and loss, to this moment where the fate of all hangs on a hobbit's unseen steps. What does it mean to become what you were born to be? To love though it breaks you, to find meaning in a world that endures beyond your days. The stars are hidden, but their song lingers, and in its echo, Aragorn's journey reaches its crescendo, a final verse in a tale that will never truly end. The battle at the Black Gate was a storm of steel and sorrow, a defiance of despair. Aragorn fought at the fore, his voice a clarion call, his blade a star in the chaos. Around him men felt their courage, a light that burned through the dark. He thought of Frodo alone in the fires of Mount Doom, carrying a burden no man could bear. He thought of Gandalf, whose wisdom had guided him, now fighting beside him as a brother. He thought of Arwen, whose love was a fire in his soul, a vow that held him to this world. The 39th lesson of exile came amidst the clash of swords. To fight for another's hope is to find your own. Aragorn's battle was not for victory, but for time, for the chance that a small heart might triumph where kings could not. The earth shook, and the tower of Barad-dûr fell, its shadow crumbling like dust. The ring was destroyed, Sauron's malice undone, and the world breathed free. Aragorn stood amidst the host, their cheers a tide that washed over him, yet his heart was quiet, heavy with the cost. The victory was not his, but Frodo's Sam's, a triumph of the small and the steadfast. In the silence after he walked the field, his eyes tracing the faces of the fallen, their names a litany in his heart. The 40th lesson of exile was this: glory belongs to the humble. To lead is to honor those who walk unnoticed, to lift their deeds above your own, to know that the world is saved, not by kings, but by the courage of the least. The road turned westward to Minas Tirith, where the white city stood scarred, but unbowed. The people gathered, their eyes bright with a hope they had forgotten, their voices calling for a king. Aragorn entered the city, not as Strider, not as Thorongil, but as Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Elendil. The crown was brought forth, its silver a mirror of the stars, its weight a reminder of the path that led here. Gandalf placed it upon his brow, his hands gentle, his eyes alight with pride. In that moment, Aragorn learned the 41st lesson of exile. To accept a destiny is to embrace its burden. Kingship was not a prize, but a vow, a promise to serve, to heal, to guide a world still wounded by shadow. The coronation was a song, a moment where the world seemed to pause. Aragorn stood before his people, their cheers a river, their trust a weight heavier than the crown. He spoke not of triumph, but of rebuilding, of planting seeds for a peace that might endure. He walked among them, his hands touching the old and the young, his voice a balm to their fears. The 42nd lesson of exile was this: a king is a servant, not a ruler. To lead is to kneel, to see the heart of every soul, to carry their hopes as your own. Aragorn's throne was not in the tower, but in the streets, in the fields, in the quiet moments where a people found their strength. Arwen came to him, her presence a light that stilled the world. In the courtyard of Minas Tirith, where the white tree bloomed anew, she stood before him, her eyes a sea of love and sorrow. Her choice to forsake immortality was a wound that would never heal, yet her smile was a star that burned through the pain. Aragorn took her hand, his heart breaking and mending in the same breath. Their union was a vow, not of safety but of truth, a truth that said, "We will walk together though the road is short." The 43rd lesson of Exile was, "This love is a journey, not a destination. To love is to accept the end, to cherish the moment, to build a life though it fades." Arwen was his queen, his heart, his reason to be more than he was. The days of peace were a gift, yet they carried their own trials. Aragorn ruled as Elessar the Elfstone, his wisdom shaping a kingdom reborn. He rebuilt the walls, planted the fields, forged alliances with Rohan and the realms of the south. Yet he walked also in silence in the gardens, where the white tree stood, its blossoms a reminder of Numenor's grace. Here he reflected on the journey, on the lessons of exile that had made him. The wild had taught him duty. The world of men had taught him leadership. The fellowship had taught him vulnerability. The war had taught him sacrifice. But what was the meaning of it all? The 44th lesson of Exile came in the quiet life is a tapestry woven of choices. Every step, every wound, every hope shapes the pattern, a story that endures beyond the teller. He thought of his fathers, of Isildur, whose failure had haunted him. In the halls of Minas Tirith, where the shards of Narsil were now honored, not hidden. Aragorn saw the past anew. Isildur's choice was a wound, but it was also a door leading to this moment, to a world redeemed. The 45th lesson of Exile was, "This legacy is not a chain but a seed. To inherit the past is to plant it, to grow something new from its roots, to honor the fallen by living for the future." Aragorn's reign was not a denial of his father's flaws, but a redemption of their dreams, a kingdom built on the hope they carried. The years passed, and the world changed. Aragorn's hair grew silver, his face lined with the cares of a king. He walked with Arwen through the fields of Gondor, their hands entwined, their laughter a song that defied time. He watched the hobbits return to the Shire, their hearts grown great, their lives a testament to the power of the small. He stood with Legolas and Gimli, whose friendship was a bridge between worlds, their tales a fire that warmed the heart. In these moments he learned the 46th lesson of Exile. Joy is the fruit of sorrow. To live is to know both, to weave them into a life that shines brighter for its shadows, to love a world that is both beautiful and broken. Yet the shadow of mortality lingered. Aragorn knew his days were numbered, his life a candle that would burn out. Arwen's choice bound her to the same fate, a grief he could not unmake. In the quiet nights when the stars burned clear, he faced the truth of their ending. The 47th lesson of Exile was this: to accept death is to embrace life. To know the end is to cherish the now, to fight for the moment, to love though it hurts. Aragorn did not fear death, but he mourned the parting, the leaving of a world he had fought to save. His reign was a preparation not for eternity, but for the next, for a kingdom that would endure beyond his breath. The final days came as they must. Aragorn lay in the house of the kings, his crown at his side, his hand in Arwen's. His son Eldarion stood ready, his eyes bright with the promise of a new age. Aragorn looked upon his people, his friends, his love, and saw the world he had helped to shape, a world of peace, of hope, of life. The 48th lesson of Exile was this: the journey's end is its beginning. To walk the path of exile is to return to the question, who am I, and find the answer in the lives touched, the hopes kindled, the love given. Aragorn was no longer Estel, nor Strider, nor Thorongil, but Elessar, a man who had become himself through the choices he made. He spoke to Arwen, his voice soft, his words a final gift. He spoke of the wild where he learned to hope, of the wars where he learned to lead, of her who taught him to love. He spoke of the world which would go on its song unbroken. Then he closed his eyes, and the stars seemed to sing their light, a promise that no shadow could claim. The 49th lesson of exile was this: death is not defeat but surrender. To let go is to trust, to give the world to those who follow, to know that the journey continues in their steps. Arwen stood alone, her heart a sea of grief and grace. She walked to Seren Amroth, where their love had first bloomed, and there she lay down her life, fading into the earth. Her passing was a star falling, a light that lingered in the hearts of those who knew her. Aragorn's legacy lived on in Eldarion's reign, in the songs of minstrels, in the white tree that bloomed through the ages. The 50th lesson of exile came not to him, but to us. The story is never finished. To live is to be part of a greater tale, to weave your thread into the tapestry, to love and lose and hope until the stars themselves fade. And so we stand, not at the end, but at a pause, where the wind carries the scent of earth and sea, where the stars burn with a light that speaks of forever. Aragorn's journey is done, yet it lives in us, in the questions we ask, the burdens we bear, the hopes we hold. What lessons do we learn from our own exiles? What names do we claim? What loves do we cherish? What legacies do we leave? The road is ended, yet it stretches on a path of shadow and starlight, of sorrow and song. There is a fire within, eternal and true, that whispers not, "Walk on, but sing on, for the tale is yours and the world is waiting."